I vow, this is the truest story I'll ever tell. Picture the Sierra Nevada under siege, the wind screaming, wolves circling, snow hammering roofs until beams groan. In the valley below, Red Creek whispered of one man, a cowboy so large he seemed cut from the mountain itself. They said no woman could endure his silence, his roughness, his unforgiving home. 7 brides had come, each vanishing back to town before the week was out. But one woman arrived different. Clara Morales, heavy-set, scarred by loss, eyes steady as stone. She didn't flinch when others fled. She didn't curse the storm. She stayed. And in staying, she reshaped a man's life forever. Don't turn away, because the moment silence became their bond instead of their enemy, the mountain itself seemed to bow. Watch closely, for this is the West as it truly was. Harsh, merciless, and yet filled with quiet love. The wind clawed down from the Sierra Nevada peaks, a long, hungry howl that made shutters tremble and lanterns sway. Hank Lawson stood in the doorway of his cabin, his frame filling the opening, hat brim pressed low against the sting of snow. Down the trail, a wagon rattled, wheels screaming against the frozen ruts as they carried off the 7th mail-order bride who had abandoned him. She didn't wave. She didn't even glance back. The driver snapped the reins, horses lunged, and the sound dissolved into the storm. Hank's chest rose slow. He had seen this picture before, 7 times. His boots sank deep in the drift gathering on the porch, and his eyes followed until the wagon became a blur. Then nothing. Silence swallowed the gap silence and the cruel hiss of wind. To his left, nailed into the porch rail, hung a rough plank of pine. Weather-worn letters cut into the grain. This home was built for 2. He had carved the words himself 3 years back, young enough to believe them. The cabin had smelled of fresh-cut timber, pine sap, and hope. He remembered lowering the knife, smiling at the thought of another pair of hands to share the weight. Now frost had crawled into each letter, white scars mocking him. Inside, the room felt too wide, the shadows too long. Hank shut the door with a thud that rattled the walls. Fire popped inside the stone hearth, sparks twisting up the chimney. The table stood ready, 2 plates laid. One remained clean, untouched as always. He stacked it beneath the others, the motion deliberate, ritual by now. 7 women had left, but the habit of setting 2 places clung to him, like the smell of smoke in the rafters. He set aside his gun belt, Colt Peacemaker thumping on the table. A Winchester leaned by the wall, oiled and waiting. In these mountains, a man lived or died by how fast he could reach steel. Shelves above the hearth sagged with jars of beans, sacks of flour, coffee tins stamped with the Carson City seal. Prices had bled him near dry. $5 a sack for beans, double for coffee, whiskey near 10 in Red Creek's saloon. He remembered the auction yard there, dust, spurs on boards, a preacher shouting over the racket, while card players yelled inside the silver spur. That was where he'd signed the broker's paper. Coins from months of trapping handed for the promise of a partner. 7 promises. 7 failures. The storm slammed the cabin hard enough to groan the beams. Hank rose fast, shoved a log deeper into the flames. Sparks leapt. Wind battered again. His jaw set. He thought of the last one, her shrill cry, "I can't bear another night of silence. This place is cursed." Her words still echoed like a pistol crack in his ear. He pulled a chair to the fire. The wood complained under his weight. His scarred hands hung open, palms up as if begging warmth. They were hands that could snap a log in 2, that had raised these walls, hunted elk, fought men. Yet none of that strength had kept a woman here. The gusts pressed harder, shutters clattering. He lit another lamp, the flame small, trembling. He checked corners, tightened the shutter bars, patched a draft with pitch. Then he stilled. From outside came a thin, sound-high, eerie. Not just wind, a coyote. Another answered. Then closer, low and rumbling, wolves. Hank froze. The hair on his neck lifted. He snatched the Winchester, stepped to the door, listening. Scratch, claw. A snarl pressed against the storm. He eased the latch up, cracked the door. White night howled in his face, snow driving sideways. In the swirl, he caught the flash of two eyes at the tree line, yellow and unblinking. Then gone. He shut the door, barred it tight. His heart beat faster, the room suddenly smaller. Alone, he could face beasts or men. Alone was the curse. He sat again, but the silence pressed heavier. The empty chair across the table seemed louder than the storm. He reached up, pulled down a tin mug, poured thick black coffee, the bitter steam cutting the smoke. He drank standing, gaze fixed on the door as though it might open. His pulse slowed, then settled into the quiet rhythm of waiting. On the mantel sat a box. He opened it. Inside, folded letters from Denver. Descriptions of women, neat handwriting, prices, promises. He fingered the last page, Ruth's name scrawled there. She was due on the winter wagon. But winter had a way of swallowing wagons whole. He shut the box, returned it to its dust. Hank's gaze shifted to the plank outside. Built for two. His chest tightened. He stood, sudden, shoved the spare chair back to the table. He placed a clean plate, tin cup, knife and fork. The ritual reversed. Hope stubborn and mule-strong, even if it mocked him. The fire sank low. Shadows lengthened. Hank sharpened his knife, steel rasping on stone. Each stroke steady, each stroke echoing the pulse of a man who would not surrender. Wolves yipped again, farther this time. He set the knife down, eyes drawn to the dark window. Reflection met him there, broad shoulders, hollow eyes. The cabin had taken his laughter, his warmth, but not his will. He opened the door once more. Snow whipped his face raw. The valley below stretched white, silent. He whispered into it, voice rough, vow-like. This cabin's not finished. Then he closed the door, latched it, and sat back at the table where two places now waited. The wind keened, but inside the hearth crackled, stubborn against the dark. He didn't know it yet, but someone already rode north, wrapped against the cold, eyes steady. The 8th, and she was not like the others. The supply wagon groaned up the frozen trail, wheels biting against ice. Horses snorted, breath white as smoke. Old Pete Morrison hunched over the reins, scarf pulled to his nose. 15 winters he had run this route, but never with the sky this heavy, never with the pass this mean. On the seat beside him, a woman sat wrapped in gray wool, broad-shouldered, full-bodied, coat straining at the seams. She did not shrink. She did not sway. She sat upright, gloved hands folded, eyes fixed forward. Her name was Clara Morales, 28, hair black as coal under a knitted shawl. She had left behind the textile mills of Kansas City, where machines screamed until her bones rattled. The broker's papers had promised her to a giant cowboy in the High Sierra, a man named Hank Lawson. His letter had been plain, not polished. He had written of storms, hunger, silence. He had not lied. The wagon lurched down into Red Creek. Buildings lined the main road, false fronts nailed to lean shacks, snow stacked against walls. Smoke twisted from chimneys. Chickens scattered across hard ground, while children in patched coats stamped their feet to keep warm. Pete pulled the team up at the general store. "End of the line, miss," he muttered, stiff joints creaking as he climbed down. Clara followed, boots sinking into slush. Town eyes locked on her, men leaning against posts, women clutching baskets. Even the preacher with his Bible, every one of them stared. They knew Lawson's record. 7 brides had come. 7 had fled. Whispers cut through the cold. "Too fat. Won't last. Fool girl." Heads turned, lips curled. Clara heard it all. She tightened her shawl, but did not lower her chin. Her gaze met theirs one by one, steady, unblinking. Across the street, the Silver Spur saloon doors banged open. Smoke rolled out, carrying whiskey and sweat. A piano rattled over card table curses. Spurs clanged. Laughter rose sharp. Red Creek lived and bled on liquor, bets, and gossip. If anyone noticed Clara, it was with mockery ready on their tongues. Hank Lawson was not there. He was up the trail, alone in his cabin. But Pete knew folks were watching. "Best not linger," he said, reining the team again. They pressed north. The road narrowed, climbing into pines heavy with snow. Hooves cracked ice, wheels shrieked. Wind screamed down the gorge. The wagon jolted hard, nearly tipping. Pete swore, yanked the reins. Horses flailed, eyes rolling. For a breath the world tilted, white blur rushing past. Was this how her journey ended, spilled into a ravine before it began? Clara gripped the rail, boots wedged, body anchoring the seat. She did not scream. She did not cry. She braced, silent as stone. The wagon steadied, creaked back onto track. Pete shot her a look, astonished. "Most holler fit to wake the dead." "You didn't, no use in screaming," Clara said. The trail leveled at last onto a shelf of land. A cabin crouched against the gale, chimney coughing smoke. By the stacked woodpile stood a man large as legend, coat whipping like sailcloth. Hank Lawson. Pete hauled the team to a stop. "Got your package, Lawson," he called, voice raw. "Roughest run yet. Don't know if I'll make it back before the pass shuts," Hank's eyes fixed on the figure climbing down. Clara stepped heavy, her breath steady clouds in the freezing air. She turned, met him square. "I am Clara Morales," she said. "I have come as arranged." Hank shifted, uneasy. Hat brim shadowed his gaze. He expected fear. He expected disdain. He found neither. Her dark eyes measured him, calm, unwavering. Pete tossed her bag down. "Good luck to you both," he muttered. Then with a crack of reins he was gone. Wagon swallowed by white. Silence pressed close. Snow swirled. Clara and Hank faced each other, strangers bound by paper, by need, by chance. Hank cleared his throat. "Come inside." Too cold to stand, she followed. The cabin breathed heat, wood smoke heavy. The room simple. Table, hearth, shelves of beans and flour. She set her bag by the wall, turned slowly, gaze tracing each corner. Her hand slid across the table's surface. "You built this yourself?" "Yes," Hank answered. "3 summers." "It is good work," she said. "Solid." The words landed hard. He flushed, looked away. No one had said solid to him since his father. Clara unwound her scarf, dark hair damp, cheeks flushed. She pulled her coat free, revealing a plain dress stretched taut across her frame. She was not delicate. She was not fragile. She was rooted. Outside, wolves howled sharp. Hank's head turned, but Clara did not flinch. She listened, steady as the pines. He gestured to the chair opposite his own. "Sit." "Rest," she lowered herself. The wood groaned beneath her weight, filling the emptiness with sound. The chair across from Hank, empty for so long, was no longer empty. Motif fulfilled. The second place at the table was filled. The fire popped. Shadows danced. In Red Creek, men laughed at the giant's foolish hope. In the cabin, silence thickened, but it was no longer hollow. 2 people sat. 2 breaths mingled with smoke. Neither spoke much, yet both knew. This meeting was not like the others. Snow slid from the roof in heavy slabs as the storm thickened. But inside the cabin, firelight held steady. Clara Morales sat at the table, her back straight, dark eyes roaming the room with that quiet, appraising calm. Hank Lawson shifted awkwardly by the hearth, uneasy beneath her gaze. He was used to women shrinking from the logs, from the silence, from his own bulk. Clara did not shrink. She studied. The cabin smelled of pine pitch and smoke. The walls bore the scars of an axe blade, knots dark as eyes. A rifle leaned in this corner, cleaned and loaded. Pegs held Hank's broad hat and a coat worn pale at the seams. Every board had passed through his hands. He had cut, hauled, joined each log, one season at a time, until the place rose solid against the mountain. "You built it alone?" Clara asked at last. "Every stick," Hank said. His voice was gravel. She ran her palm across the table surface, following the grain. "It will outlast both of us." The words caught him. He almost spoke, then stopped. Praise from the others had been empty. forced through gritted teeth. This was different, simple, true. Outside, the wind screamed across the ridge. Wolves answered in the distance, sharp notes curling under the eaves. Clara glanced at the shutter but showed no fear. Hank noticed. He had seen fear often enough to know the difference. He moved toward the stove. "Stew," he muttered. "Venison and beans." "I will take some," Clara said. She unwound her shawl fully, hanging it over a peg. Her dress was plain brown calico, threadbare at the cuffs. The fabric strained, but her movements were careful, steady. She carried herself not as a guest, but as one who intended to stay. Hank ladled stew into a tin bowl, set it before her. His hands shook slightly. 7 times he had done this, each with hope that turned to ash. Why did this time feel different already? Clara tasted, chewed, nodded. "Good." "The meat is tender," Hank shrugged. "Trapline was kind last week." "You keep salt?" "On the shelf." She rose without hesitation, fetched the tin, sprinkled lightly. Her manner was domestic but not meek. She acted as if the space already belonged to her. Hank's chest tightened, unsettled by the sight. She ate in silence, spoon scraping steady. Hank sat across, lifted his own bowl, but his eyes kept straying to her hands. Broad, strong fingers scarred from needles and work. Not the delicate hands of women who fled. These were hands that mended, built, endured. When the bowls were empty, Clara wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Tomorrow I will wash and mend." "I saw your shirt sleeve torn," Hank blinked. "You noticed?" "Always notice stitches," she said. The cabin fell quiet. Fire popped. Shadows shifted. Hank's eyes went to the plank outside. Its carved words hidden by night, but burning in his memory. This home was built for 2. Could it be true now? A crash shook the shutters. Hank sprang up, hand on the rifle. Clara stiffened, but did not cry out. A branch had snapped under the weight of snow, slamming the wall. Hank lowered the gun slowly, heart pounding. He glanced at Clara. She had not moved from her seat, only watched him with level eyes. "Mountains temper," he said. "I have heard worse tempers," Clara replied. Her calm unsettled him more than fear would have. He poured coffee, set a mug before her. She accepted, hands steady, steam clouding her face. In the silence, Hank's thoughts circled. 7 times he had failed. 7 times the cabin had grown emptier. Why should this time be different? Because she did not tremble at wolves. Because she did not flinch at his scars. Because when she touched the table, she touched it as if it was her own. Clara sipped slowly, then set the mug down. Her eyes fixed on him. "You look as though you expect me to leave." Hank froze. 7 before me?" she asked. He nodded. 7. "And none stayed?" "Not one." His throat tightened. "They wanted comfort." "This place gives none," Clara folded her hands. "Comfort is a lie sold in town markets. Survival is truth." "I did not come for lies," Hank swallowed hard. His chest felt lighter but heavier all at once. The fire sank lower. He rose, threw on a log, sparks leaping. The shadows grew taller, looming along the log walls. Clara's gaze followed them, then returned to him. "You fear the silence," she said softly. Hank jerked. The words cut straight through. "How?" "I worked mills," she interrupted. "Machines screamed until ears bled. Silence after that is not curse. It is gift." He stared at her. The cabin had never held such words. Wind howled again, rattling shutters, pressing snow against the seams. But inside, the air had shifted. Clara stood, lifted her carpetbag. "Which is my room?" Hank hesitated. "There's a bed in the loft. Straw tick." "Not much. I have slept on worse floors," she said. She carried the bag up the ladder, her boots heavy on the rungs. Hank watched her vanish into the loft shadows. He stood alone in the main room, firelight licking his face. The empty chair still warm from her weight. He touched it, fingers brushing the worn wood. For the first time in years, the chair no longer mocked him. Above, floorboards creaked as Clara settled. Wolves howled again, farther now. Hank sat. the weight of silence pressing. But it was not the old, hollow silence. It was thicker, warmer. He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling beams he had notched with his own hands. His jaw tightened, then eased. Perhaps this cabin was not finished after all. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, 2 lives had begun to cross. And in the night, with wolves circling and snow piling high, Hank Lawson realized the mountain had not rejected him yet. Dawn came gray and brittle, light spilling across ridges drowned in white. The cabin roof sagged under drifts, smoke creeping weak from the chimney. Hank rose early, pulling on boots stiff with cold, joints aching from years of labor. He stepped outside to split wood before the sun caught the valley. The axe bit deep, crack echoing sharp through frosted pines. Each blow sent chips skittering across snow, steam rising from his shoulders. From the loft above, Clara Morales stirred. She pushed back the quilt Hank had laid out, joints protesting after a night on the straw tick. She had slept harder than she expected, exhaustion from travel weighting her bones. When her eyes found the rafters, she felt no panic, only the strange calm of a roof solid against storm. She descended the ladder, boots thumping. The cabin smelled of cold iron and ash. She moved to the stove, lifted the lid of the pot Hank had left half full of stew, still edible. She set it aside, reached for flour, water, and the cast iron pan. Her hands, blunt-fingered and scarred, worked without hesitation. She kneaded, shaped rough cakes, laid them on the hot plate to blister. Hank entered, beard dusted with snow. He paused at the sight. Clara bent over the stove, hair tied back, sleeves rolled to thick elbows, movements practiced. The hiss of frying dough filled the silence. "You're up early," he said. "Morning waits for no one," Clara replied. She flipped the bread with a knife, steam rising. "Sit." He hesitated. Command was not what he expected, but he obeyed, lowering into the chair. She set before him a plate flatbread, warmed stew. The second plate, the same that had mocked him nights before. He looked at it, chest tight. "You didn't have to." "I do not believe in waiting to be served," Clara said simply. She sat opposite, eating with steady spoon. The cabin was quiet, but not empty. Outside, wind rattled pines. Inside, fire snapped. Hank chewed slowly, studying her face. Plain, strong-jawed, eyes deep as a canyon. She did not fidget. She did not fill silence with nervous chatter. She ate, swallowed, set her spoon down, looked back at him level. "This bread," Hank said, "better than mine." "Your stew," Clara answered, "better than the boarding house slop." For the first time in months, Hank almost smiled. After the meal, Clara cleared plates without asking. She scrubbed tin in hot water, wiped with cloth, hung them to dry. Hank watched, uneasy, then rose to bring in firewood. When he returned, Clara was at the table with needle and thread, mending his torn sleeve. Her stitches ran neat, precise, the kind only years in mills could teach. "You work fast," he said. "Slower than machines," Clara replied, eyes fixed on the seam, "but steadier." He studied her bent head, the concentration in her brow. The last 7 brides had stared out windows, counting days until escape. Clara bent into work, as if each stitch was a promise. The day passed in rhythm. Hank cut wood, checked snares, shoveled snow from the roof. Clara swept the floor, organized shelves, folded spare linens. She found a jar of beans cracked and molding, threw it out. She lined the rest by size, sealed lids tight. Hank noticed when he came in, arms loaded with logs. "You touched my stores." "They were poorly kept," Clara said. He bristled. No one touched his order. Yet when he looked, the shelves were cleaner, jars neat, sacks sealed against damp. His irritation eased. "You wasted nothing?" "Only what was already ruined." The wind rose again as afternoon dimmed. Hank set traps by the ridge, returning with a hare. Clara skinned it quickly, hands sure, then set it simmering with onions. Hank watched, surprised. "Where'd you learn?" Boarding house, Clara said. Had to stretch every scrap. Hunger teaches faster than books. That night, the cabin filled with scent of stew richer than Hank remembered in years. He ate slowly, almost reverent. Clara's eyes softened. You stare, she said. He flushed. Not used to someone across the table. And do you like it? His voice caught. Yes. Outside, wolves prowled close, their cries high and cruel. Inside, fire glowed warm. For the first time since the cabin was built, Hank felt the house hold more than timber. It held presence. After supper, Clara gathered the scraps, salted them for later. She wiped the table clean, humming low, a tune without words. Hank sat still, listening. The sound filled corners silence had long haunted. When the chores were done, Clara folded her hands. This cabin is strong, she said, but strength alone does not keep storms out. Tomorrow I will check seams. You'll what? I will patch where drafts come. I have cloth, Hank swallowed. 7 women had cursed the cold, demanded blankets, demanded to leave. Clara spoke of patching. He nodded. I'll help. The fire burned low. Clara climbed the ladder to the loft, boots heavy on rungs. Hank remained below, staring at the table where 2 plates rested washed and ready. The plank outside whispered in memory. This home was built for 2. For the first time, he believed. But the mountain was not done testing them. Snow pressed higher against the walls. Wolves circled closer, hungry eyes glowing at the tree line. In town, men wagered how long the fat woman would last before running. Tomorrow, the storm would return, and the real trial would begin. Morning broke under the sky the color of hammered iron. Hank Lawson shoved the cabin door open with his shoulder, snow rising to his knees. The pines groaned in the wind. Ice cracked from branches, falling sharp as glass. He closed the door fast, boots stamping frost onto the floorboards. Storm's coming, he said. Clara Morales already crouched by the north wall. A draft hissed through the seams. She stuffed rags into the gap, needle flashing, cloth swelling wet with water. It will not break us, she said. Hank watched. The 7 before her had cursed drafts. Clara fought them. Her fingers reddened, breath sharp, shoulders square. By noon, the sky vanished. Snow fell heavy, fast. The cabin dimmed through lamps burned bright. Wolves went silent. That silence was worse than their howls. Hank fetched his traps near the ridge, returned with only 1 thin hair. Not enough, he muttered. Clara salted the meat, stirred beans into broth. Enough, if we stretch. Afternoon collapsed gray. The storm rose. Wind struck the walls, shaking beams until dust sifted from rafters. Flames coughed, choking for air. Clara rose. Where's the weakness? Hank pointed. North wall. I feared it since spring. Then we fix it. Together they crouched in the corner. Snow licked through, fine as needles. Hank pressed his palm. It froze instantly. Clara's hands jammed cloth into the gap, then poured water, watching it swell, ice sealing the joint. Will it hold? Hank asked. It must. The storm thickened. The roof boomed. Icicles shattered, clattering off shingles. Snow slammed against shutters so hard a tin cup rattled on the table. Wolves howled at last, close, circling. Hank grabbed the Winchester, checked rounds. Clara cut more strips of cloth. When the fire dipped, Hank cursed. Wood's out. I will fetch, Clara said. No, his voice barked. Too deep. Too cold, she tied her shawl tighter. I have walked worse roads. His hand clamped her shoulder. Not while I breathe. He wrenched the door open, stepped into white chaos. The gale swallowed him. Inside, Clara pressed against the shutter, heart hammering. Would he come back? Would the snow bury him whole? The storm screamed. Minutes stretched. Then the door burst wide. Hank stumbled in, arms loaded with logs, coat crusted in ice. He dropped them with a crash, chest heaving. Clara seized a log, thrust it into the fire. Flames surged high, shadows leaping. Heat flooded the room. She turned, eyes locked on him. You risked death. I had to. Fire dies, we die, they sat close, steam rising from boots. The storm clawed outside, but light returned inside. Clara broke silence. How many storms alone? Too many, Hank said. And did you wish for a voice? His jaw clenched. Yes. You have it now, she answered. The words struck deep, heavier than prayer. Hours dragged. They ate thin broth, mugs steaming. Clara mended gloves, lamp glow steady on her bent head. Hank sharpened his knife, steel rasp filling silence. The cabin no longer echoed empty, it breathed with two rhythms. Near midnight, the storm peaked. The roof boomed. Shutters tore loose, slamming. Hank leapt, rifle ready. Clara two-shoulder braced against the latch until he hammered it back. Her breath hissed, yet her eyes burned steady. Most run, Hank said. I have run enough. No more, her words cut sharp. He saw not fragility but iron. The cabin groaned again. Snow pressed high. A claw scraped woodwolf testing the wall. Clara stiffened, but did not cry out. Hank raised the rifle, finger tight on the trigger. The sound faded. They listened to silence heavier than the storm itself. At last, dawn cracked pale. Light leaked through seams, weak but true. Hank shoved the door open against weight. Snow walled them nearly to the windows, glittering like glass shards. Clara stepped beside him, shawl wrapped tight. Her breath caught. Beautiful. The valley lay drowned in white fire. Every branch glazed with ice, every ridge shining. Hank watched her face, not the land. Wonder softened her eyes. No, he whispered, neither have I. The wolves had retreated, trails hidden beneath the snow. The cabin still stood scarred, patched, but standing. Inside, two bowls waited clean, ready. The plank outside whispered in his memory. This home was built for two. Together, they had passed the first trial. But winter was only beginning, and the mountain would test again. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence thicker than wool. Snow stacked against the cabin walls until the windows were buried, white pressing from all sides. Inside, the fire cracked slow, the only voice in a house smothered by stillness. Hank Lawson stood near the hearth, shovel in hand, brushing ice from his boots. His breath came hard, fogging in the draft that slipped through chinks. He had endured silence before days with only axe and trap for company, but this silence felt heavier, crowded with another presence. Clara Morales sat at the table, her shawl wrapped close, needle flashing in the lamplight. She patched a glove he had torn hauling wood. Her stitches were straight, deliberate, each tug sharp in the hush. She did not hum as she had the night before. Her lips pressed firm, eyes lowered. Hank shifted. Silence had always been his enemy, yet he had believed another soul might break it. Now, with Clara there, the hush pressed harder, as if the mountain weighed on them both. He watched her, wondering if regret had crept into her bones overnight. Food's thinning, Hank muttered at last. His voice sounded too loud, jarring. Traps are buried. Could be days before I dig out Clara knotted thread, bit it clean, laid the glove aside. We manage. 2 words, nothing more. Hank swallowed, set another log on the fire. Sparks jumped, shadows clawed high across the walls. The room grew warmer, yet his chest stayed cold. He remembered the 7 before. They had filled silence with complaints, sobbing, pleading for town lights. Clara filled it with nothing. That nothing was heavier. By midday, a shaft of sunlight slipped through a seam near the roof, striking the rifle stock propped in the corner. Hank rose restless. Roof held last night, but I need to check. It held, Clara said without looking up. Best to be sure. He shoved the door against weight and climbed out onto drifts hard as stone. The roof glittered with ice, sagging under snow. He swung his axe, chopping chunks loose, breath ragged in the brittle air. Each strike rang sharp, echoing down the valley. He struck harder, as though he could drive back silence with steel. Below, Clara swept the floor. She shook blankets, folded them neat. She found a ledger tucked on a shelf, Hank's scrawled notes of pelts, beans, dates of storms. She traced ink grooves with her thumb, seeing years of solitude marked in tally lines. She closed it carefully, set it back as if not to disturb. When Hank returned, boots heavy with clumps of snow, Clara had a thin soup simmering beans stretched with water, the smell faint but warm. She ladled it into tin bowls. He sat, spoon clinking loud. She ate across from him, measured, unhurried. At last she spoke. "Why do you fear silence so much?" Hank froze, spoon halfway. "You breathe hard when quiet falls," she said, her gaze steady now. "Why?" He set the spoon down slow. "Because silence means I'm alone." "But you are not alone." Her voice was calm, not kind, simply true. The words struck him harder than wind. He stared, saw no mockery, no softness, only plainness, like the mountain itself. He wanted to speak, but words tangled. Evening fell quick. Blue shadows swallowed the valley. No wolves cried. That absence rang louder than any howl. Hank sharpened his knife, rasp of steel against stone filling the cabin. Clara mended again, lamplight brushing her bent head, her hands moving steady. Finally she asked, "7 women. What did you tell them?" "That I was what I was," Hank said. "Hard. Silent. This place makes you hard. They wanted dream. I gave them truth, and they ran." He nodded. Clara tied thread, set cloth down. Her eyes lifted. "I do not run." The fire popped. Hank's chest burned. He rose sudden, pacing. Rafters pressed low, cabin shrinking. "Then why no words? Why do you sit so quiet?" Clara's gaze stayed level. "Because silence does not frighten me." "Does it frighten you?" Hank halted, breath harsh. The truth hung raw. Night deepened. Snow settled with groans, logs shifting under weight. Hank sat again, slower, shoulders bent. Clara poured coffee into his mug. Black, bitter. He lifted it, drank. Warmth spread through his chest, though silence still pressed. Long minutes passed. The fire dimmed, but the quiet did not bite as deep. Before climbing to the loft, Clara paused at the ladder. Her hand rested on the rung. "You are not alone, Hank Lawson. Not anymore." He looked up, but she had turned, boots thudding on wood. He sat until the fire sank to embers. Shadows wrapped the cabin. The chair across from him, once a wound, now held memory of her presence. Not empty anymore. He lay in bed later, blanket rough, listening. No wolves, no wind, only the steady rhythm of her breath above the rafters. He lay awake long, chest loosening. For the first time in years, silence did not crush. It carried. Yet the mountain was not finished. Food stores thinned. Snow rose higher. And trust, though sparked, was fragile as firelight. The weight of silence had shifted, but the greater test still waited. Snow sealed the valley, glittering sharp under a pale sun. For 2 days, no sound stirred beyond the crack of settling drifts. Cabin windows showed only white, a buried world pressing close. Hank Lawson woke before dawn, muscles stiff, chest heavy with worry. Food dwindled. Traps lay hidden beneath yards of snow. Hunger stalked slower than wolves, but it stalked sure. He rose, pulled on his coat, and checked the door. Ice held it half shut. He shoved until hinges groaned, forcing it open to a wall of snow. He carved a path with his shovel, breath smoking hard. Each swing echoed flat in the muffled stillness. Behind him the cabin glowed faint, fire snapping weak. Clara Morales stirred the embers, coaxed flame from ash. She ladled thin soup into a tin mug, beans stretched with melted snow. Her shawl hung heavy with patches of frost. She set the mug near the fire's edge, then joined Hank at the doorway. "The drifts grow higher each hour," she said. "We'll clear enough to breathe," Hank answered, sweat cutting lines in the frost on his beard. She watched him dig until his shoulders strained, axe-wide arms hammering into snow. He was a giant cut from timber, but exhaustion bent even giants. She laid her hand on his arm. "Enough! The mountain has already won this round." Hank leaned on the shovel, chest heaving. His eyes burned at the white wall that replaced his valley. I built this place to stand. But what's a cabin worth if it starves inside? Clara's gaze did not falter. A cabin is worth as much as those willing to fight for it. They closed the door against the cold, sat by the fire with steaming mugs. The broth was thin, but the warmth steadied them. Hank studied her face as she drank. No flinch, no complaint. The 7 before had wilted at the first pinch. Clara seemed carved for it. Town's betting against us, Hank muttered. Every man in Red Creek figures you'll run. I did not come here to run, Clara said. I came here to live. Her words struck deeper than hunger. Hank felt heat crawl into his chest, fiercer than the fire. By afternoon, wind rose again, not storm but bitter sweep. Hank checked the walls, hand sliding across seams Clara had patched. They held tight. He turned and found her watching him, needle poised above another tear in her dress. You trust cloth more than wood? He asked. I trust what my hands can mend, Clara said. That night, wolves returned. Their cries shredded the dark, circling, closer than before. Shadows flitted beyond the shutters, bodies low, patient. Hank loaded the rifle, set it across his knees. Clara sat across, her sewing set aside, her eyes steady on the door. Scratching came. Claws raked wood. The latch quivered. Hank's heart pounded. He raised the rifle, finger tight. Clara lifted a lamp, flame high, casting glow through cracks. Yellow eyes glimmered back, blinked, then vanished into the black. They'll test us all winter, Hank said, lowering the gun. Then we meet each test, Clara replied. The fire roared low, shadows curling tall. Hank felt the hush press again. But different now waited not by loneliness, but by 2 breaths held together. Near midnight, a crack split the roof. Snow thudded heavy, rattling walls. Hank leapt for the ladder, climbing fast. Clara followed without hesitation. Together they pushed drifts from beams, hands numb, bodies pressed against the strain. When the weight slid free, thundering into the yard, Hank nearly lost footing. Clara's grip on his arm steadied him. Back inside, panting, snow clinging to their coats, they dropped before the fire. Hank's chest shook, not from cold, but from the jolt of her hand still on his sleeve. He pulled away slow, uncertain. You should have stayed below, he said. You should have let me help sooner, she answered. Her eyes glinted, dark and sharp as obsidian. Hank looked away, heat rising in his face. The silence that followed was not empty, not hostile, but tight with something unspoken. They ate the last of the hare that night. Clara stretched broth with roots she had dried and hidden in her bag. Hank stared at her, surprised. You brought food? Dried turnip, she said. Small, but enough for flavor. You thought ahead, Hank muttered. I always think ahead, Clara replied. The truth settled like another log on the fire, weighty, solid. Before climbing to the loft, Clara paused. Storms, wolves, hunger, none frighten me. But lies do. Do not lie to me, Hank Lawson. Not about what you fear, not about what you want. Hank met her gaze. His voice was low, raw. Then I'll give you nothing but truth. She nodded once, then climbed the ladder, boots steady. Hank sat alone, rifle across his knees, fire throwing long shadows. Wolves howled again, but farther this time. He stared at the empty chair across the table. It no longer mocked him. It waited. The mountain had tested them with storm, silence, hunger, wolves. Each trial had been met side by side. But Hank knew winter had claws still hidden, and in the heart of that buried valley, beneath the roof they had just saved, another trial stirred, one not of ice or beast, but of trust, of hearts learning the cost of staying. The storm left the world muffled, sky a pale dome, snow stacked to the windowsills. Days blurred, marked only by the hiss of the kettle, the rasp of Hank Lawson's knife on stone, the rhythm of Clara Morales' needle. Outside, silence pressed. Inside, silence shifted, heavy with things unsaid. Hank split logs each morning, shoulders rising and falling with the steady crash of the axe. Clara cooked what she could, beans boiled thin, scraps stretched, flour turned to dense cakes. They worked in tandem, never idle, yet words between them came sparse. The silence had changed. No longer the loneliness Hank feared, but a tension that demanded reckoning. One evening, as the fire burned low, Clara set her mending aside, her eyes fixed on Hank, who sat cleaning his rifle by lamplight. 7 women before me, she said. You told me why they left, but not what they feared in you. Hank's hands stilled. The cloth hung limp. He stared at the barrel's dark mouth. They feared the quiet. They feared the weight of this place. And maybe they feared me. Feared what? Clara pressed. He lifted his head, eyes shadowed. That I would never bend. That this mountain had carved me too hard to share a life. Clara's gaze did not falter. And is that true? Hank's jaw worked. I don't know. The fire cracked, sparks hissing into the chimney. Clara leaned back, folding her arms. I buried a husband once. Consumption took him quick. I was 19. We had 6 months. Love was not enough. It broke me to learn that. Since then, I trust only what endures. Hank looked at her across the firelight. The truth in her voice carried more weight than storm. She did not flinch from scars, her own or his. Later that night, while Hank slept heavy, Clara climbed down the loft ladder. She opened his ledger again, fingers brushing ink lines of pelts and beans. Among the tallies, she found another page, torn at the edge. Names, women's names, dates beside them. She traced each one, Mary, Ellen, Ruth, Abigail. 7. Her throat tightened. She shut the book softly, set it back. She did not wake him. By morning, Hank sensed something in her silence had deepened. At breakfast, he said, You found the ledger. Clara's spoon paused. Yes. You think less of me for keeping count? I think truth weighs heavier than lies, she answered. But it is heavy to share a cabin with ghosts. Hank's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, but the words tangled. Finally, he said, They are gone. You are here, and if I leave? The question cut sharper than wind. Hank's eyes snapped up, panic flashing before he masked it. Would you? Clara's gaze held him steady. I ask to know what remains of you if I do. The mountain, the cabin, or only silence. Hank rose fast, pacing, boots thudding the planks. Don't test me with leaving. Not after all this. Clara's voice stayed level. I test not you, but myself. Every day I choose to stay. Do you? The fire snapped. Hank turned, breath harsh. He saw her steady, unshaken, not cruel, but demanding truth. He felt walls inside him crack. I do. Each day. I chose to build this place, and I choose to stay. With you, for the first time. Clara's shoulders eased. She looked down at her bowl, then back at him. Then perhaps we can build more than shelter. That evening they worked side by side, patching seams, stacking wood. Outside, wolves paced unseen, their cries distant. Inside, a different test played, learning to trust words as much as deeds. As night deepened, Clara poured coffee, set a mug before Hank. If you wish me to stay, you must not hide behind silence. Speak when silence grows too heavy. Hank nodded, fingers tight on the tin mug. And you? I will not run, Clara said. The cabin breathed easier after that. Yet beneath the warmth, a new unease flickered, because trust once spoken demanded proof. Later, as Hank dozed in his chair, Clara opened her carpet bag. From within, she drew a small silver ring, worn, the only relic of her first marriage. She turned it in her fingers, then slid it back. Eyes wet but steady. She had told him truth. She wondered if he would tell all of his. Snow creaked on the roof. A shutter rattled. Wolves cried again, closer. Hank stirred, rifle within reach. Clara blew out the lamp. The valley lay drowned in white silence. The cabin stood scarred but strong. Inside, 2 people sat across the fire, each carrying ghosts, each daring to stay. And though neither spoke, Both knew the true trial was no longer storm or hunger. It was the question of whether two scarred lives could knit together without breaking apart. Days stretched pale in the buried valley. The snow held them prisoner, sealing every path. Inside the cabin, life shrank to fire, food, and silence. Yet silence no longer bit the same. It pressed, yes, but pressed with the weight of questions neither dared speak aloud. Hank Lawson chopped wood each dawn, his axe splitting rhythm into the still air. Clara Morales baked dense bread on the stove, mended seams, tended fire. Their hands worked constantly. Their eyes often met, but words remained measured, rare. One morning, Hank returned from digging traps, boots heavy with ice. He dropped 2 frozen rabbits on the table. Clara skinned them fast, her knife clean and sure. "Enough for 2 days," she said. Hank sat, watching her hands. He wanted to say more. Instead, he muttered, "Better than none." Clara's dark eyes flicked up. "We do not speak of better or worse. We speak of enough." Her steadiness unnerved him, but also steadied him in turn. That night, after supper, Hank pulled his ledger from the shelf. He hesitated, then laid it open before her. "You found it before," he said. "Read it now." Clara's brows lifted. She turned the pages, tallies of pelts, beans, storms. Then names, 7. Dates, notes, gone after 3 nights. Left at dawn. Refused the quiet. Her jaw tightened. "You counted them like pelts," she said. Hank's throat burned. "I kept record because I had nothing else to keep. Each time I thought maybe this one would stay. When they left, I wrote so I would not forget they had been real." Clara closed the book gently. "I am not ink on a page." Hank's voice cracked low. "I know." The fire hissed. Shadows curled. For a moment, neither moved. Then Clara reached across the table, touched the scarred cover. "If I stay, you must stop tallying ghosts." Hank nodded, his great hands folding shut the ledger. He set it back on the shelf, slow, final. The next morning, the silence broke not by words, but by laughter, low, surprised, rough in Hank's throat. Clara had found his boots near worn through, soles cracked. She sat mending them, muttering in Spanish when the thread tangled. Hank chuckled. The sound startled them both. "You laugh," Clara said, blinking. "Forgot how," Hank admitted. The days grew lighter. Wolves prowled but did not test the walls. Food stretched thin but did not vanish. And in the cabin, something shifted. Silence still reigned, but silence warmed. One evening, Clara placed a small silver ring on the table. Hank stared. "My first husband," she said. "I keep it to remember. But memory weighs heavy. You should know it exists." Hank's chest tightened. He touched the ring, rough fingers brushing smooth metal. "Do you still love him?" "I did," Clara said, "but love did not keep him alive. I learned that love alone is not enough. You must choose each day to stay, to work, to endure." Hank lifted his eyes. "And do you choose that here?" Clara held his gaze. "I do." Silence stretched again, but this time it carried no fear. Later, when the wolves howled near, Hank opened the door, rifle ready. Clara stood beside him, lamp raised high. Eyes glowed at the edge of the pines, then vanished. Hank lowered the rifle, his hand brushing hers as she lowered the lamp. Neither pulled away quick. Winter dragged on. Weeks blurred. The snow pressed higher, food thinner, but still they endured. The cabin walls, scarred and patched, stood strong. So did the bond that had begun to form inside them. Yet the mountain had one more test in store. A blizzard came sudden, harder than before, 3 days without break. The roof sagged, shutters buckled. Hank and Clara worked side by side, bracing beams, shoving snow free. Their bodies ached, hands raw, but neither gave in. On the 3rd night, when the fire nearly died, Hank turned to her, chest heaving. "Why do you not curse me like the others? Why do you not damn this place? Clara's face shone with sweat and soot, hair loose, eyes blazing. Because I did not come here for ease. I came because you wrote the truth. And truth, Hank Lawson, is all I ever wanted. The words broke something loose inside him. He dropped the hammer he held, voice raw. Then truth is this. I feared you would leave every day. But tonight, for the first time, I believe you will not. Clara's hand rose, firm on his arm. I will not. The storm raged. Wolves cried beyond the drift, but inside, the cabin glowed with a different fire. When dawn cracked, the world lay buried yet again, but Hank felt lighter. He had not been tested alone. He had been tested with her, and for the first time in his life, he did not fear failing. The blizzard's wreckage lay heavy across the valley. Pines bowed under frozen weight. Branches snapped and littered the drifts. The cabin stood scarred but unbroken, smoke curling weakly from its chimney. Inside, Hank Lawson's body ached, arms raw from 3 days of hammering beams and shoveling snow. Yet his chest felt lighter than it had in years. Clara Morales had not faltered. Together they had endured. But the mountain was not finished. Hunger pressed sharper than storm. Provisions thinned to scraps. Flour nearly gone. Beans counted by handfuls. Dried meat nothing more than rind. The ledger bore tallies Hank hated to mark. Fewer jars, fewer sacks. He set the pencil down hard, jaw tight. If I don't run traps, we starve. Clara lifted her gaze from the mending. The drifts are too deep. I've run them deeper, Hank answered. He reached for his coat, rifle slung. Clara rose fast. If you go, you may not return. Then neither of us will see spring, Hank said. Silence burned. He turned toward the door. Her hand caught his sleeve. Strong grip, no tremor. Then teach me before you go. Hank froze. Teach me rifle, Clara said. Teach me to read tracks, to see sky signs. If the mountain takes you, I must not die waiting. Her words cut him. He looked at her, plain dress patched, hair loose from the day's work, eyes hard as flint. She was not asking to be spared. She was demanding to stand equal. He nodded slow. At first light. That dawn they stepped into brittle air, boots sinking deep. Hank showed her how to brace the Winchester, cheek against stock, breath slow. He set bottles on a post. The valley rang sharp as she fired. First shot wide, second closer, third shattered glass. Hank's chest swelled with something between pride and fear. You learn fast, he said. I must, Clara answered. They tracked rabbits across drifts, Hank pointing prints, Clara naming them back. They cut sign of fox, then deer, then wolf. Each step carried risk, snow collapsed sudden, breath froze in beards, wolves shadowed the ridge. But Clara walked steady, not wasting motion. When Hank's boot slipped, she gripped his arm, holding firm until he steadied. By dusk they returned with 2 rabbits strung and 1 grouse. Clara skinned them without flinch, hands working neat. Hank watched, remembering how others had gagged at blood. Clara's jaw never shook. That night the stew tasted richer than any feast. Hank leaned back, weary but alive. Clara looked across the fire, eyes reflecting flame. Now I know, she said. If you fall, I can keep this place. Hank swallowed hard. I don't want to fall. Then don't, Clara said simply. But the mountain cared nothing for wanting. A week later, Hank pushed farther on the trap line, climbing higher into the pines. Snow crusted thin above Hollow's treacherous ground. He pressed forward, breath ragged. Then the crust broke. He plunged waist deep, caught by roots hidden under drift. Pain lanced his ribs. The valley spun. For a moment, he could not breathe. He clawed at snow, dragging himself free. Each breath burned. He pressed his side, felt the deep bruise swelling. Wolves cried faint. Dusk closed in. Clara waited at the cabin door, lamp raised against blue dark. When Hank staggered into the yard, she ran to him. boots plunging through drift. She slung his arm across her shoulders, half dragging him inside. "What happened?" she demanded. "Drift broke. Rib, maybe cracked." She lowered him to the chair, hands fast. She pressed cloth to his side, brewed willow bark tea bitter as bile. She forced him to drink, steadying the cup in his huge hand. Through the night she tended him, rising each time he gasped, stoking fire, changing cloth, keeping wolves at bay with her lamp burning high. She did not rest. At dawn, Hank opened his eyes. Clara sat across, head bowed, hands clasped. The ring of her first husband lay on the table, silver catching light. She had placed it there again, between them. "You stayed awake," Hank whispered. "I did," Clara said. "You could have left me." "Taken the rifle, the food, gone down valley." "I could," she answered, "but I do not run." Hank's chest ached more from her words than the bruise. He reached across, covered her hand with his, scarred, rough, heavy, but gentle. "Then we are partners," he said. Clara met his eyes, steady. "Yes, but partners must share everything." "No more ghosts," Hank nodded slow. For the first time he wanted to tell every truth, every scar, every fear. He would, in time. Outside, the mountain glared white, merciless, vast. Inside, two scarred lives leaned closer, stitched not by chance but by choice. They had stood at the border between life and death and had chosen to stand together. The bruise on Hank Lawson's ribs deepened purple, slowing his swing of the axe. Clara Morales kept close, steady as stone, heating poultices, rationing food, making him rest when pride pressed him too hard. Winter still chained the valley, yet inside the cabin a different season stirred. The silence between them carried warmth now, broken not by storm but by questions long deferred. One evening, with snow pressing high against shuttered windows, Clara laid aside her mending and faced him square. "We survive storms, wolves, hunger," she said, "but survival is not enough." "Tell me what you want, Hank Lawson." "Not from the mountain." From me, her words hit harder than wind. Hank set down the knife he'd been sharpening. His rough hands trembled. He had faced avalanches without fear, but her gaze stripped him bare. "I want—" He stopped, jaw tight, then forced it out. "I want a family. Not just a cabin patched against storms, a life with more than waiting to die." Clara's eyes softened, though her voice stayed firm. "Then say it plain. Do you want a wife, Hank, or only a partner for labor?" Hank's chest rose, ribs aching with each breath. "I want a wife. I want you." The fire snapped, throwing sparks into the chimney. Clara looked at him long, measuring. At last she said, "And if I give you that, will you hold to it when the mountain tests again? Not just with hunger, but with grief, with loss." "Yes," Hank said, voice rough but steady. Her shoulders eased. For the first time, a small smile touched her lips. Tired, cautious, but real. "Then we understand each other." That night the fire burned brighter, though they spoke no more. Yet something had shifted permanent. The days that followed carried new rhythm. Clara hummed as she baked flatbread, the sound threading warmth through the cabin. Hank carved wood by the hearth, shaping spoons and bowls, his hands less restless than before. They shared more than chores now. They shared glances, small gestures, silences no longer sharp, but close. One morning Hank caught her hand as she set his coffee down. He held it longer than needed, thumb brushing her calluses. She did not pull away. "Your hands are stronger than mine," she said softly. "They've only known work," he replied. "Then they will know care," Clara said. Her words sank deep. That afternoon, Hank taught her to plane boards. Together they shaped pine planks smooth, wood curling fragrant. Clara's laughter broke sudden when a shaving stuck to her hair. Hank reached to brush it free, fingers lingering. The sound of her laughter echoed long after, warmer than any fire. But the mountain did not pause. Hunger gnawed still. Wolves circled nearer, their tracks carving rings around the cabin. The ledger's tallies shrank to near nothing. Hank grew restless, ribs healing slow. Clara pressed him to patience. "A cracked rib heals faster than a widow mourns," she warned. One night, as wolves howled fierce, Hank stirred from his chair. "They test our walls," he muttered. He gripped the rifle, but Clara set her hand on his arm. "Not every test is met with bullets," she said. "Sometimes the test is whether you can endure the noise." Her hand stayed until he set the rifle down. The fire burned low. Hank turned to her. "You ever wish you'd chosen town? Lights, neighbors, safety?" Clara shook her head. "Safety is an illusion. Towns burn, mills collapse. Men betray. Out here, danger is honest. And so are you," Hank swallowed, throat tight. "And you still stay." "I stay because you do not lie," she answered. Her eyes glowed in lamplight, steady as flame. The days lengthened by inches. Sunlight lingered longer at the windows, though snow still buried the valley. With each dawn, Hank's ribs eased, his stride steadier. Clara planted seeds in small pots by the hearth: parsley, onion, beans saved from stew. Life sprouted fragile but certain, green against the gray. One evening, as Hank stacked firewood, Clara asked quiet, "Would you want children here?" Hank froze. "I thought never to dare. And now?" He turned, eyes on her face. "Now I dare. But only if you wished it too." Clara's gaze did not waver. "I do. A child raised with truth, not illusions. Strong, not for beauty or comfort, but for endurance." Hank's chest swelled, ribs aching less than his heart. He stepped close, voice low. "Then we will build more than shelter. We will build a home for the first time since his youth." Hope no longer felt like betrayal. That night, the fire glowed softer, warmer. They sat near, shoulders brushing. Neither spoke vows, but something passed between them heavier than any preacher's words. A promise forged not in ceremony but in storm, hunger, silence. As midnight fell, Hank lay awake, listening to her breath above in the loft. He no longer feared silence. It carried her presence. He closed his eyes, and for once, he slept without dreams of abandonment. But the mountains still watched, waiting with new trials hidden in thaw and spring. Their fire had been lit, but fire must feed or fade. The first hints of thaw came: sudden icicles dripping slow, snow crust sagging under weak sun. Hank Lawson stood at the doorway, ribs healing, breath strong again. Clara Morales joined him, shawl pulled close, her eyes sweeping the valley. White still ruled, but streaks of earth showed at the roots of pines. "Winter loosens," Hank said. "It does not loosen its grip without claws," Clara answered. Days grew brighter, wolves thinned, their cries more distant. Birds returned, shy notes threading through the quiet. The cabin, scarred and patched, smelled of pine resin, broth, smoke. It smelled of survival. Hank worked longer outside, cutting trails, checking traps freed from snow. Clara planted beans in pots, coaxing green tendrils near the hearth. Life edged back. Still, hunger pressed. They rationed with care, each meal measured, yet neither complained. One morning, Pete Morrison's wagon creaked up the pass, the first sign of town since snow closed the valley. Hank stepped outside, raising a hand. Pete reined in, eyes wide at the sight of Clara beside him. "Well, I'll be," Pete said. "Looks like this one stayed, Lawson. Never thought I'd see it." Hank's chest swelled. He looked at Clara. She met his gaze steady. Pete climbed down, handed over a letter sealed in Denver ink. "From the broker. Asking if you want another bride." Clara stiffened. Hank tore the seal, read. Words offered fresh candidates, younger, prettier, promises of companionship. He crumpled the page in one great fist. "Tell him," Hank said. "His services aren't needed." "Not now." "Not ever," Pete chuckled, eyes kind. "About time you told the world that." He loaded supplies onto the porch: flour, salt, coffee. Then he tipped his hat to Clara. "You've done what none before could. You've given this man a reason to look past the ridge. Clara's cheeks flushed, but she lifted her chin. I did not come here to be a reason. I came to build. Pete nodded slow. Then you'll outlast the rest. When his wagon rattled down the pass, silence returned, but not heavy. Hank turned to Clara. He's right. You've given me more than reason. You've given me truth, Clara folded her arms. And truth demands work. Spring will test us new. They began at once. Together they cleared snow from the garden plot, soil dark beneath white crust. Hank split timber, building a new frame at the cabin's side. Clara sewed curtains from rough cloth, color stitched into gray walls. One evening, as they worked by lamplight, Hank spoke. We'll add another room. A place for your sewing, for my carving, and for what may come. Clara looked up. You speak of children. I do, Hank said, voice low but certain. If you wish it. Clara touched her palm to her stomach, then to his hand. I wish it. A family built on truth, not illusions. The fire glowed between them, no longer a fragile flame but a steady hearth. Spring advanced. Snow retreated to high ridges. Water roared in streams, carving paths through the valley. Grass rose green, flowers braved the thaw. Hank and Clara worked side by side, planting beans, corn, squash. Sweat beaded on brows, earth-stained hands. They laughed at small stumbles, shared bread at midday, leaned on each other when tools grew heavy. At night, they sat on the porch, watching peaks fade gold in sunset. Hank carved, Clara sewed, silence stretched soft. She leaned against his shoulder, and for once he did not flinch. Do you regret answering my letter? Hank asked. Clara turned her head, eyes dark and sure. Never. This is where I belong. The mountain loomed vast, merciless, but they no longer faced it alone. Weeks later, Clara felt first signs, a stirring within her, faint but certain. She told Hank one morning by the hearth. He froze, axe in hand, then let it fall. He crossed the room in 3 strides, eyes wide, rough hands trembling as they cupped hers. A child? He asked. Clara nodded. If the mountain wills, yes. Hank pulled her close, breath breaking in his chest. He had feared many things, storms, wolves, silence, but not this. This was not fear. This was a joy so fierce it hurt. From then on, he worked with double strength. He raised the new frame, cut beams, smoothed planks. Clara planned space for cradle and cloth. Together they built not just for themselves, but for what would come. Pete returned in summer, found them working side by side, garden thick with green, cabin stronger than before. He grinned wide. Looks like you two figured the secret. Mountain doesn't bow, but if you bend with it, it gives back. Hank nodded. We stopped fighting it. We became part of it, Pete tipped his hat. Then you'll outlast even me. When he left, Hank and Clara stood on the porch, arms around each other. The valley spread vast before them, pines whispering, river shining. They had come through storm, silence, hunger. Now roots dug deep. This story did not begin with love, Clara said, eyes on the horizon. It began with staying. Hank squeezed her hand, and staying became love. They watched the sun sink, the sky blaze red, the peaks glow. For the first time, the mountain felt not enemy, not test, but home. They had crossed storms, hunger, and silence, yet found in each other not weakness, but endurance. Hank had learned that a giant's strength was hollow without someone to share the fire. Clara had proven that staying could be braver than running, and together they built roots that no blizzard could tear away. One evening, long after Pete's wagon had rattled back toward town, Clara set a tiny sprout in a clay pot by the window. For the child, she whispered, and Hank, rough hands trembling, touched the fragile green as if it were more precious than gold. In that moment, He realized the greatest victory of his life was not surviving alone, but daring to build with another. Their story began not with love, but with the stubborn choice to remain when leaving would have been easier. And love grew from that soil like spring after a brutal winter. And so the question remains for us all. In a world that tempts us to run at the first hardship, do we still know how to stay? If this tale touched you, leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe for more stories of endurance, and share so others may feel the quiet strength of this mountain home. For life's truest lesson is simple. Sometimes the greatest courage is not in conquering, but in staying.